I think for many females, we often focus on the less positive aspects of our experience. And perhaps if we were going for a role, we think about all the reasons we wouldn't get that role versus the reasons we would.
Welcome to Women Who Lead. I'm your host, Jess Carr, business leader, mother, and breadwinner in my family. Join me as I interview interesting and remarkable women from around the world on what it takes to be successful in career and life. My guest today is Shelley Boland, Asia Pacific Head of Property for Standard Chartered Bank. Starting her career as a banker, Shelley found herself halfway through her career and on the other side of the world when faced with the closure of her business line. With no equivalent role in Australia to come home to, she found another unlikely path that has taken her to success. Listen in as she takes us on her career journey and shares her wisdom on what to do when you're faced with no clear road ahead. Hey Shelley, welcome to the show. So good to have you here.
Hi Jess, thank you very much.
So you started your life as a banker, and then throughout your career took you to overseas, over to the US, I believe it was. And then the global financial crisis happened and you found yourself there in the States without necessarily a job to come home to back in Australia. So you were kind of faced with this moment in your career, which could be one of those fork in the road moments. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it is that you got to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. As mentioned, I didn't start my real estate career in a traditional way, as some of your listeners may. I was lucky enough to be working for an investment bank that was looking to open a mortgage operation in the US. I was part of the startup team and relocated as the COO to set up that operation. And when we first arrived in the US, the markets were great. As many of the listeners probably recall, there was a slight adjustment in the real estate market as we came into 2005, 2006. And as a result, we ended up closing that mortgage operation and focusing back on our core business in Australia. Unfortunately, that meant for me a transition. I was on the other side of the world, away from family and not clear on the road ahead, when a phone call came from a client of mine within the bank around an opportunity in corporate real estate. So what we'll talk about today is sort of what happened from there, and that pivotal moment started my corporate real estate career in the US, back to Australia, and now more recently in Asia Pacific, and never looked back.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's just, I guess, take us to that moment when you receiving that phone call and, you're talking to the client about switching the careers. What was the, I guess, first of all, what was your mindset around this kind of like, I might not have a role to go home to? Like, what was your kind of mindset like at that point in time?
Yeah, Jess, honestly, a mindset at that time was a challenge to be dealing with. Even though I would classify myself as a resilient person, there was a lot of uncertainty, both within the markets, within obviously my career, and I was on the other side of the world, away from friends and family, and I obviously had responsibilities. So I'll be honest, it definitely was an unsettling time.
And I guess, I mean, this is quite an unsettling time that we're in at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic around the world. And, that's certainly shook up a lot of different markets. So I guess thinking about, when you were in that moment of unsure of what to do, was there anything that you were doing in that moment to kind of find a bit of stability within yourself and to try and make some decisions going forward?
Yeah, I think living in these uncertain times can definitely be uncomfortable, but really the only thing you can control is your own response. So for me, the most important things that I looked at in terms of this response was I first needed to stay positive and learn how to handle the stress of both home and work. And it reminded me of that saying, when one door closes, another opens. I think then I was wanting to change my mindset. I needed to reinforce and show my value. I knew and I had a strong belief in my ability, but I needed to repivot to that external market and reposition myself. And I think also I took the time to then reflect and make sure I was quite current and future-proof my career For example, I looked at updating key skills that I thought would be essential. I made sure I was networking with my peers. I was staying close to industry trends and very much in a very curious and learning mindset to try and, I suppose, build a resilient response to what had been an unexpected event.
So it sounds like, as you're saying, you're putting a lot of preparation into for what was going to come next. But were you also thinking about like passion or a bigger mission when you were actually thinking about, okay, what could my next steps be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, you need to get up every day and look forward to what is ahead of you, no matter what sort of role you're in. So for me, I also took the time to reflect on what I really enjoyed doing and then how does that fit in with my next move. So for me personally, I considered in my decision-making factors such as I really enjoy and love working with people. I am quite client orientated, whether internal or external. I really like problem solving and a challenge. And I think I was ready for another diverse move, whether it's industry or geography. So very much those passions for me came into my decision-making process.
And I guess the kinds of things that you've just talked about are core, like your transferable skills that you can take from industry to industry. So tell us just a little bit about that opportunity that was presented to you. So what did you do next?
I think one of the things I reflected on was I had a core set, as you said, of transferable skills that I thought would be beneficial in my next move. I had organisational knowledge that the move was within my current employer, so I did have institutional knowledge that I thought was definitely going to assist. And while not exactly in the same sector within real estate, I had the basics of the real estate industry in my back pocket that I thought I could refer on. But I think mainly the things that I was reflecting on is that regardless of whether I was in the mortgages business or the corporate real estate business, I had a toolkit that I thought could set me up for success. And that was everything from stakeholder and relationship management skills, a strong commercial acumen from being a COO of business. Mentioned before, I'd worked with, people, leadership roles and quite diverse teams. And so for me, I felt like while I didn't have that technical real estate specific training that perhaps, would have been required, I had enough that I felt I could add value to that position.
So I guess one of the common questions that people sort of have when they're in these moments and they're looking ahead, and as you say, you look at your skills and what you have to offer, what you're passionate about, and where you could potentially take this to. But I think something that a lot of people can kind of grapple with is, do we have to start over? If I go into a new industry, do I have to start from the very bottom?
Yeah, I would suggest mine wasn't a start over as such, but I like to describe it maybe as a bit of a left turn or a pivot. It very much was a lateral move. So to some people may have thought that it was an interesting choice that I made. I think for me, though, I then took the time to build up my knowledge, rebuild my credibility, and then recognition followed. So it wasn't going from ground zero, but it definitely did take some time to take that lateral move and then get the next step forward. As said, then my career has gone from strength to strength since that time, but I did have to put in some time to repurpose my skill sets to take on the new opportunity.
And do you think not having any official qualifications in the beginning, do you think that held you back in any way in making that transition?
Yeah, while I don't have a technical background such as engineering or facilities, I was able to leverage a lot of my training and education where I've done my undergraduate and more recently my MBA. So I think there were some core skills that made sense to move into that role. The other thing too is I surrounded myself with the experts. And then I took a very open-minded approach, listened to them, and then that helped me make a really informed decision about a corporate real estate strategy that perhaps I wasn't as familiar with. The other thing I found really helpful as a tactic was I joined a lot of industry associations. So, for example, IFMA and Cornet, and just tried to build out my knowledge through learning from peers. And then I identified that there were some areas that I did need to accelerate that understanding, and courses such as the MCR through Cornet I found really valuable to be able to hone in on some of those specialist skills.
When you're looking at making that change and you're walking into an environment where you're not necessarily a subject matter expert in there, you might have, as you're saying, the stakeholder management, you've got the other kind of transferable skills, but not having the subject matter expert skills. Did it feel in the beginning, did it feel risky? Did it feel like did you know you were making the right decision as you kind of walked into that?
Yeah, it was a risky decision. I took a role that was based in New York, so I made a commitment to stay offshore for a longer time. I joined a new part of the organisation where I was less known, and as you said, I was learning. I was obviously sort of midway through my career, so it was on a trajectory that was taking a slightly different path. So I did need to go in with confidence. And I suppose the attitude that I've always used is to stay open-minded. Most opportunities that come my way, I will say yes to. And I have a view, well, what's the worst could happen? If I didn't like it, it was not going to be detrimental, and I could always change it and pivot to a new adventure if it wasn't landing the way I wanted.
So, because it's interesting, as you said before about that some people would think that it was an interesting career choice. It might not be the standard normal progression. So was there something in there that was also adding to the kind of risk that you were taking, or perceived risk anyway?
Yeah, I think having always worked in financial services, there has been a sense of the front office versus the support functions. And I suppose I had been building out a career of 10 to 15 years in that investment banking client side, as I said, mortgages, financial services side of the group. So I think for me, while I appreciated and very much leveraged the support functions within the organisation, I was less familiar with how that could fit in with a longer term career. And I think there's a perception, I don't agree with this perception, but at times there is a perception that front office is a glamorous part of the business. And if you can, that's where you want to be. And so this was definitely crossing over to the other side of the group.
Well, it's obviously worked out quite well for you. You've been very, very successful in this role. So as you obviously then have gone from strength to strength since then, have there been other moments in your career where you've needed to kind of make that next leap?
I think one of the moments I'll reflect on is after transitioning back to Australia for a few years, I thought I was home. I was settled back with my friends and family. And an opportunity came to me to come to Asia. And it was a 2-year assignment. It was very much project-based, a turnaround assignment. And again, reflecting on that time and place, it was absolutely the right decision to take. I think that has very much set me up for the next moment in my career, because not only did it bring me to Asia and the diverse, exciting region that this is, but it then also expanded the opportunities that were presented, and it led me to find Standard Chartered, which I joined around 6.5 years ago. And that has been a great move to complement the first phase of my career at Macquarie Bank.
And so I guess, we were talking earlier about how sometimes being a female in this industry and also being in corporate real estate, that, sometimes maybe we're not going to back ourselves in some of these big decisions. Is there a thing that you do, or is there something in your mindset or the way that you approach things that helps you back yourself and to take these different risks?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is down to self-confidence and also self-awareness. So I do appreciate that there are things that I'm learning. I think for many females, we often focus on the less positive aspects of our experience. And perhaps if we were going for a role, we think about all the reasons we wouldn't get that role versus the reasons we would. So I think it sounds logical, but for me, I try and focus on the positives, what I can bring to the table, and then keep an open mind. My example earlier showed that a phone call from a client was something that if I hadn't considered that and if I didn't have the confidence to take that step forward, I would have missed an amazing opportunity and what turned out to be a hugely exciting next chapter in my career.
And so, you know, you were saying this whole story is you started as a banker and then you've moved into the corporate real estate. But even within, I guess, those two larger buckets, you've reinvented yourself again and again for each of those roles. Because as you were mentioning, there was, you know, going back to Australia and then coming up to Asia again and coming from the US. And, you know, just talk to us a little bit about how each of those are a bit different and also how you need to show up differently for each of those.
Yeah, I think I was reflecting on my, parents' career, that they sort of started in a role and retired in the same industry or role. And while I don't take anything away from that, that's fantastic. I think the opportunity in the markets now and the geographical diversity that we work in, it does afford you the chance to reinvent yourself a number of different ways. And if you want to try new avenues, new adventures, you very much have that in your gift. I think I'll come back to those core points, that there were things that I really liked to do and I wanted to always find roles that bring that to me. I have focused on building out those half a dozen key skills that I think, regardless of if I was in real estate, banking, hospitality, I think they would be transferable. And the areas that you needed to be different in terms of show up is understanding your client, your new client, what's important to them, and then how you can partner with them to solve problems and deliver on their outcomes. So, every time I've changed direction, I've still gone in at the end needing to understand what is the outcomes that I need to perform for this role and what's the best way to get there.
This has been a great insight into your journey and some of the kind of key things that you've faced. And I think this would be very, very helpful for anyone, particularly in this time of flux, who is either looking at a forced career change or thinking about, wanting to step out and do something different. And, this is fantastic advice around, focusing on your core skills and then how to show up in each of those opportunities. If you had one piece of advice that you would like to leave us with, what would that be?
I think if I was one piece of advice, if I was talking to a 20-year-old Shelley, I think the best thing you can do when faced with this type of uncertainty is to really acknowledge how you're feeling. And then also prioritize areas you can influence. Not everything's going to be within your control, but there are certain areas that you absolutely can get back in the driver's seat. And so for me, identifying those, taking a lead position in where I can make a difference, I found that was a great way to help me get through times where I was facing quite an unknown path ahead.
Yeah. And just to dig on that, because it's quite interesting around the areas that you can influence. Do you mean that in terms of what you can influence externally or influence internally within yourself? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there's probably two ways to look at that. Obviously, there are external market factors, and if I think of my time in the US, the downturn in the real estate market was not something I could personally control or influence. The only thing I could do was how I responded to that. And as I said, think about my next move. So there are going to be factors that you will need to go with the flow. But I suppose my conversation there is when you are facing that uncertainty, try and prioritize the areas that you feel like you could control. So that's either your own response or perhaps something externally that you feel you could influence an outcome. But ultimately, there are going to be, look at the environment we're in now, there are so many factors that are going to influence your next step. So I just encourage, when you're faced with that adversity, just look at internally what are the areas that you can control, and then put yourself back in that driver's seat.
Yeah, really, really kind of taking back your power and taking control over your own destiny.
Try to, yes.
Try to, yeah. Well, that's it, Hopefully the stars align then on the other side. It's been an absolutely fantastic time talking with you, Shelley. You've given us some fabulous insight into what to do in when you are faced with that uncertainty, and I think that's really valuable information for the current situation that we're in and have been for the last year or so, and it's going to continue for some time to come. And so thank you very much for spending the time with us today. And really looking forward to seeing your next moves and and going from strength to strength.
Oh, thanks so much, Jess. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Women Who Lead. Visit my website, jesscarr.com, to sign up for more podcasts and information on women who lead. If you found value in this show, please share it with your friends and be sure to tune in for our next episode. I'm your host, Jess Carr. Bye for now.